Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arno. And today we have big honor to have with us Johan Vanderplaetse, our also first vice president, but in Russia, our co-chairman of the board. But also, he's, of course, not also, but first of all, he's a president of Schneider Electric in Russia. I think today, but Johan, I will let you the floor then to explain the presentation. You want, I put already the slides?
Yeah, well, yes, maybe just, yeah, you can do that, no problem. You can pull up the slides. I just basically indeed wanted to share a slide which was also discussed at the EU arranged conference just a week ago in Russia, when we were talking specifically about the Green Deal. The Green Deal, we all know, I mean, this massive transformation program is supported by the EU Commission, but it also has an implication on Russia itself. And before I go there, I also basically wanted to set a little bit the tone about the sustainability issue and climate change specifically in this part of the world. Next slides. So it is a topic which, as Arno was saying, it's a global topic. I mean, climate change is happening everywhere, but in Russia, I would say, or you could argue that it's really very hot topic, a hot topic in the literal sense of the word as well, because the climate change in Russia is indeed 2.5 times higher than the worldwide average. And especially in the Russian Arctic, which is the last couple of weeks heavily in the news, we see that there the warming is 4.5 times higher than the worldwide average that you see. So the problem is there, although you could argue that it is less a topic which is alive in the Russian society than you would have back in Belgium or in Luxembourg or in other countries, for a number of reasons. First of all, it is not really about or among the public policy priorities from the government, be it the central government and the regional government. Yes, they start to talk about the topic, but by far not in the same way as you would have it in other countries. Linked to, secondly, also the population at large. The Russian population at large seems to be less concerned about climate change. There was a survey which was done a couple of years ago, and only 20% of the Russian population really considered this as a topic of high concern. And if the population is not so much concerned by at large, yeah, okay, then no big surprise that maybe it is also less debated on the policy level. I think indeed the Green Deal took really off because of pressure from the population at large. And unlike in Brussels or in Berlin or in London, where last year we saw literally hundreds of thousands of mainly young people demonstrating, nothing at all is taking place in that respect in the Russian society. So it's not a public policy priority, it's not a population priority. On the third level, which would be the large corporation, there I would also say, yeah, maybe it is improving. They start to pay more attention to that. But it's really more on the agenda, as far as I can see from my own experience, with those type of large companies which are also publicly listed abroad, because then they do feel some pressure from their global shareholders to do something about CO2 emission and pollution. But by many companies as well, again, it is not a priority. Be it, as I said, it is a topic which is really very relevant here. And in June the 9th, the hottest place in Europe, it was not Cairo or was not Madrid or Barcelona. It was indeed the Arctic region, Verkhoyansk, which is a place which is typically known for its permafrost, recorded temperatures of plus 38 degrees Celsius. So the snow is really, the ice is really melting. It is a problem. Next slide. And part of the reason why I think it's not necessarily always considered as an issue is, and again, that's a thing that I see myself, is when you talk about climate change, often you hear the reaction, you know, why would this be a concern? We are living in a cold country, having a bit milder winters might not be such a bad thing at all for Russia. People are pointing out to some perceived benefits, like the fact that the Arctic Ocean can be navigated almost across the full year. I think personally it's very ironic that because of global warming, you have now indeed tankers with oil which are able to navigate the Arctic Sea. I mean, it's very, very ironic, but it's sometimes pointed out as an economical plus or improvement for the harvest production. Or indeed, if you have milder winters, you need to heat less, so perceived advantage of some warming. But next slide. The economical, social costs, of course, by far are outweighing any possible perceived advantage. Last year, I think you learned about the stormy weathers in Siberia, the fires that took place. I pointed out the Arctic region, whereby just a couple of weeks ago you had the big spill of 20,000 tons of diesels in Norilsk, owned by Norilsk Nickel. The tanks collapsed because of the fact that they were based on pillars which were anchored in permafrost. The permafrost is melting. The tanks are collapsing. And if you think it over, that in Russia you have 150,000 kilometers of gas pipelines, 50,000 kilometers of oil pipelines, which are running in Siberia, in many cases anchored on permafrost, and in many cases very close to rivers. I'm holding my heart that in the future you will see more cases like Nornickel. And then the permafrost itself, you have massive infrastructure, buildings which are anchored on permafrost. Yakutia, for instance, you see buildings which are crumbling away. That is also, you know, a tremendous economical cost for the country. And personally, I find it a bit ironic. We, of course, we all talk about Corona and COVID, which is a terrible thing, and I'm not trying to downplay the human loss. In Russia, you have now about 10,000 people which died from coronavirus. But just in one hot summer back in 2010, which was a heat wave over Moscow and the central Russian region, you had 55,000 people which were recorded to have died because of the heat wave in one summer alone. Yeah? So as I said, very clearly, it is a very, very important issue. Next slide. Now, what is Russia doing about that? I was mentioning the government is starting to move, and indeed they announced in March this year a climate action plan, which is proposing some measures to reduce the CO2 emission in the country. But again, they say, look, I mean, and they have made 4 scenarios, depending on the kind of aggressiveness of the measures that would be implemented. Going the most aggressive scenario with a reduction of 30–40% of the CO2 emission from the levels of 99. So indeed, as a benchmark, the authorities are taking the high levels of the 90s, and then they say we are improving compared to the 90s, forgetting that after the high levels of the 90s, which was still the Soviet era, the industry had collapsed, and that was automatically reducing the CO2 level emission. So the proposed climate action plan, as proposed by the government, is actually showing an increase of the CO2 levels as opposed to the current today's level. And that cannot be the intention of climate action. I mean, the benchmark should not be the past, the benchmark should be today, and what are we going to do to reduce the CO2 emission from today's levels. Next slide. And then another thing why it's an important topic. It is also economically an important topic, because if you look in the Russian economy, the slide is showing the export of carbon intensive products. Russia is the absolute leader worldwide because of the fact, first of all, that of course they are exporting a lot of hydrocarbons, oil and gas, but also, and that is creating most of the revenue for the Russian budget. I mean, still 64%. We talk a lot about diversification of the Russian economy, and yes, indeed, some progress has been made, but the fact remains that the economy is still today largely dependent on the export of hydrocarbons. And if you know that the biggest economical neighbor of Russia is the European Union and then China, and if you know that both countries or the EU, they have made themselves very aggressive policies in place to reduce the dependency on hydrocarbon for their energy needs. It shows, it's very clear that in the future, the biggest source of income for the Russian economy is going to not go away, but going to diminish very considerably. There's no way that Europe can meet its 2050 CO2 neutral ambition if they continue to produce energy based on hydrocarbons. And that is the explanation of the energy Wende in Germany. Renewables are taking off. And that is, of course, going to pose a big challenge for the Russian economy as we move forward. The second part of the exports of the Russian economy are the so-called energy-intensive goods, which are products. In order to produce, they need a lot of energy. And you talk about aluminium, you talk about metal, you talk about those kind of things. And here, the second challenge is important for the Russian economy, which is indeed the Green Deal, whereby there are plans to introduce what is called the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is basically a levy that is going to be imposed on imports into the EU of goods from outside of the EU which are produced in a not energy efficient way. And the logic is very clear. I mean, the EU is saying, okay, I mean, we can within the EU do all kind of measures, but if as a result production is going to shift away from Europe to other countries which do not care about how the products are being produced, energy efficiency or not, that would be the wrong way forward. So they're going to impose those kind of levies on Russian companies, Nornickel, Rusal, or whatever, who wants to export in the future as well their goods to the European market. And okay, I mean, in Russia, I know that some people say this is a hidden trade barriers that are being implemented, and it's true that we also have to look on the compliance of those measures with the World Trade Organization, WTO rules. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen for sure. But it's also an opportunity. It is an opportunity for Russian companies to invest in efficiency and automation. It is also an opportunity for European companies which are offering technologies which are enabling indeed those Russian big sites to produce in a more efficient way. So, as I said, I mean, every challenge is also an opportunity for sure for both sides, for the Russian economy to diversify, to become much more healthy, but also for European business with offering the relevant technologies. Next slide. And then indeed, I mentioned the word technologies. The good news is that the technologies are there in the meantime. I mean, we know that climate change is a massive challenge that we have. The technologies are allowing already to a large extent to address the challenge. And if you talk about the climate change, there are two ways, or two big contributors of CO2 emission. There is the generation of electricity or power, and there is the consumption. And often in the debate, we are talking a lot about the production of the energy. Go away from gas stations, go away from coal stations, invest in wind, invest in solar, which are today technologies which are as efficient or even more efficient than energy production based on hydrocarbons. So for that one, we do see a solution, which is good. From the consumption side there, I think we are not talking enough on the consumption side. And it is a fact that 40% of the CO2 emissions are coming from buildings or from large cities. And that's why we say that the battle for climate change is going to be won or lost in the cities. There, the regulator has to play a role. And I know that the EU is doing a lot there to impose energy efficient standards on buildings. We, my own company, Schneider Electric, we are in debate with Minprom-Tork and the Ministry of Economy, so that also from the Russian side, they're imposing energy efficient measures on the way that we are consuming energy here. You know, I mean, I'm living a long time in Russia, and I was always struck with the mentality of many people around energy. People think it's something which is there for free. I remember very well when I was still a student, renting a room in an apartment of a wonderful babushka. It was a mild fall. Central heating was already completely switched on. So in order to cool down the apartment, we open all the windows. So we are heating the apartment and cooling it off at the same time by opening the windows. I mean, and even still today, in many cases, this is the reality. So there is also, I think, a role that the regulator has to play to impose stricter standards, and the technologies are there. And the industry day, we can really contribute a lot by offering the technologies which are addressing those challenges. Next slide. And this is a slide I'm always coming to the end. This is okay. How does the world look like? According to us, it should be much more digital. I mean, automation, digital, predictive analytics, remote asset control, all of those things are there to stay. And COVID, by the way, which is the good news, COVID has been a massive accelerator in the introduction of digital technologies and the introduction of automated technologies, which has as a good side benefit that very often the same automation, digitization technologies, which are now being introduced, are also much more energy efficient. And then indeed, in order to reduce the carbon emission, electrification is going to be on the forefront. Next slide. Which is a slide that is showing how a building today is being incepted and being rolled out. And you see that indeed smart technologies today are allowing a much stronger control of the energy usage in homes, in residential, in commercial buildings. You have those, I mean, sometimes it's very simple things. You have a detector which is detecting that nobody is present in a meeting room. Automatically the electricity is switched off, or only part of a meeting room is being lighted there where people are seated. I mean, you have all those kind of technologies which can reduce energy consumption by 20, 30, 40%. And the payback of making the investment is also very high, which is the economical rationale of going for those kind of technologies. Next slide. And this is on the production side, on factories, smart factories. This is a slide that I picked from Schneider itself. I mean, we are eating our own meal. We are introducing smart factory production lines all across the board. And it's indeed paying back very quickly in more efficiency, bigger productivity, less energy consumption. And it's a thing I think that we will see as well being rolled out in the future as we move forward. And my last slide, Oleg, which is the conclusion on Russia. I mean, we often say Russia is standing on a crossroad. Russia is again standing on a crossroad. Russia can muddle through. They can, continue a lukewarm climate action plan, the one that I just showed. And that indeed in short term, it will allow the country still to traditionally to get income from export of hydrocarbons, and it's okay. But we will miss the boat. We will miss the boat on automation, on the modern technology, on diversification, and that's why I think that the global climate unity scenario is the only viable option for Russia to move really forward. I look at it as an opportunity, and I'm very, very happy, of course, knowing that so many European companies, big but also niche players, we are having something that we can offer to our Russian partners. Thank you, Oleg.